Welcome to another Samson Sit Down on Nothing Personal. And I hope that you are as excited as I am. Keith Hernandez is with us, someone who you all know. Whether you are a Met fan today or a baseball fan of yesterday, we're talking about an MVP, not just a broadcaster, on the field, a World Series champion. Welcome, Keith Hernandez, to Nothing Personal.
Oh, hey, great to be here, Dave. My pleasure.
I think you and I have known each other. I got into baseball in 2000 was my first season. And that's the first time we met when I was with the Expos. And then we ran into each other in Sag Harbor at a restaurant. And it was a context issue because I knew you lived in Sag, but I hadn't seen you out there. And having you on the show, especially now, as we are in the off season, we're in the holidays, and the New York Mets are leading off every conversation. And they will really throughout the season. And as a broadcaster for the team, you're around them, you're with them, you are an ex-player, you are a Hall of Famer and a Hall of Fame broadcaster in my mind. The Juan Soto transaction, walk me through what it's like seeing these players make this amount of money and recognizing that it's numbers that really, when you were playing, were never even contemplated. How do you come to grips with that fact?
Well, everything's relative. You know, everybody says, well, what would you make today? Well, I would make a lot of money today. And I came in, I made good money. I can't complain. And I saved my money. But, you know, I retired in 91. And really the top salary was $2 million a year. And I made that my last year of my contract with the Mets in 89. And around 4 years after I retired in 91, it went to 4 million, and then it went to 6 million, then it went to 8 million. And here we are today with a guy that's almost signed a contract that could be worth almost $1 billion over 15 years. So it's pretty incredible. I can tell you one thing. I wish Marvin Miller was still alive. I was a player representative with the Mets and the Cardinals, and in the 80s, and Marvin was still very much involved. And I would love to ask Marvin, and I wish he was alive, to ask this question: is when you started from scratch, when you got rid of bought the reserve clause and opened up for free agency, did you ever foresee or think that it would come to this? Also, too, one of his great achievements was tying money into the union for pension fund into television. And the owners at that time, Marvin wanted a percentage of the TV money. And the owners were fighting that at that time. And I believe we struck for it. And the owners finally came around to Marvin's way of thinking, which pretty much they always did.
Marvin was great and well known. People who don't know, Marvin Miller is really the father of what is the strongest union. And I've been going against the union for 25 years. I did with Donald Fear and Michael Weiner. Rest in peace as well. You are a part of a union that is known as the strongest union, not just in sports. It's amongst the strongest in all of labor.
Well, there's a select few of people in society, the world. I mean, actually now you figure there's so many international players. So it wasn't just primarily, predominantly, United States players. So it's a select few. When I played, there was a little over 700 players. Now there's 30 teams. There's more. I'm not going to do the math, but it is a select few and a very, very small percentage of the population. And it is a very skilled profession. And, Marvin was just terrific. And it's all, when I played, it was just game of the week on Saturday. ESPN just came in the latter part of my career with Sunday Night Baseball. Now you have Fox and you have ESPN and all this revenue coming in from television, which I think, the owners aren't in this to lose money. They're in it to win money, to make money, excuse me. And these salaries are just so off the charts. It's just really, it's hard to fathom. I mean, I'm happy for the players. I mean, but to
But you work
me,
for a team, Keith. Do you think that Steve Cohn, we can debate this, but do you think that he's making money with the Mets at the payrolls they have?
I've never got involved with the front office even when I played, and even in the booth. You know, I can tell you, we always tried to get the owners to open their books, and they never open their books. So, it is what it is. I just can't believe that owners are in it to lose money.
Well, you make
Now,
money when you
that being
sell.
said, that being said, the teams that are Cincinnati's, the Pittsburghs,
Hmm.
they're, how do they compete where you have an imbalance of, upper echelon teams? That's what concerns me most.
So last season, you had the Royals, the Guardians, and the Orioles in the postseason. The Rays have been really successful, shockingly, with their payroll. And I think there's such a premium on intelligence. And if you combine intelligence and money in a way that Steve Cohn wants to do with David Stearns, that's his goal. His North Star is the Dodgers. And the Dodgers are feared way more than any other team ever was my whole career because you've got that mentality where Andrew Friedman had the discipline not to overpay for players. Up until a few years ago, he really was disciplined about nine-figure deals, and now less so. The Mets now are looked at as the most feared organization because they're acting smart. And then Soto comes along, and the question is this Steve Cohn deciding I don't need to be smart, I'm just getting Juan Soto at any number, and then you get to $51 million a year for 15 years, Keith?
Uh, I think that Soto's a game changer for the Mets. Remember, the Mets are in New York. They're the like the White Sox are in Chicago with the Cubs. They're the little kid on the block
Mm-hmm.
with the Yankees, and always the Yankees stealing the headlines. Yankees in the past have poached from the Mets with David Cohn, Dwight Gooden, Darryl Strawberry, Joe Torre. So this is a kind of like the Mets have poached the Yankees for a change. They got their big player. Yankees wanted to, what I've read, they wanted to sign him, and were very much in the hunt. But I don't think they were going to outbid Steve Cohen. And I think this is different for the Met fans. They have an ownership that has deep pockets, and I know Steve. I've had conversations with him. He's a busy man, but he wants to win, and he's got the wherewithal. Now the big question is, are they going to sign Alonso? If they sign Alonso, and you've got Lindor, and you've got Pete, as well as Soto, and then the other guys.
It lengthens the lineup.
Vientos would have hit 30 home runs if he played the whole year with the Mets, and he just kind of blossomed. And they've got a very versatile roster as far as running out everyday players. And Carlos Mendoza has just done a terrific job of moving them in and out of movable parts, and that's a plus for the team. But if they get Pete, he had an off year last year, did not have a clutch year, and I think that was just the burden of free agency and a chance for a big contract. And Pete's very emotional, and I think it just kind of snowballed on him. So I look for him. He's going to sign with someone, and I'm hoping it's with the Mets.
Soto was also, right, Keith? Soto was on a platform year heading into free agency with the Yankees, and it seemed like in that sort of spotlight with that pressure, he excelled, and it helped him get this sort of contract, other than the fact that he's 26 years old. And we can't go any further, Keith, without mentioning that fact. Pete Alonso's not 26. Juan Soto, it's a unicorn to have someone like that. That's the reason, in my opinion, you went the 15 years and you're willing to commit. Pete Alonso will not get a contract like that, of course.
No, and I think that if Pete wants to stay, look at what's Pete going to sign for? 100. If he signs for 150 million, you're set for life. It's not like when you were, 30, 40 years ago, where you've signed an $800,000 contract or a $500,000 contract. That is not even close to what the salaries are today. You're set for life. So if Pete wants to stay in New York, and where are you going to find a guy in an off year? Pete really did not have a clutch year at all. He really, really struggled, but he still hit 30 home runs. He's hit 50. He's hit 40 twice. Those guys just don't, fall out of the heavens. They're hard to find. So with that trio of Lindor, Pete, and Soto, which you got Lindor as a switch hitter, you've got a left-hand hitter in Soto and a right-hand hitter as Pete. That is a formidable trio right there.
It's a 2-3-4 that will lead to a lot of expectations. It'll lead to a lot of comparisons with the Dodgers, Betts, Ohtani, Freeman. You've been a broadcaster with them, a player obviously, but a broadcaster through thick and thin. How do you feel differently when you're in the food room or when you're on the field, when you're talking to anybody around the game? The Mets aren't in any way going to sneak up on anybody. There's an expectation when you sign Soto, one player. Signing Clay Holmes, great. Not one conversation about that. You bring in Soto, you've got to win. And you've got to win not in April. You've got to get to and through October. Do you feel differently heading into a season as a broadcaster, like more excitement when your team could win 100 versus lose 100?
Well, of course, it's always better when your team is playing good and playing good baseball and sound fundamental baseball. And that is something that the Mets did last year. After they didn't have that May, which was just horrendous. They found a way to lose every day, a different way to lose. I never saw a team have such a terrible month as they did. And then to turn it around, really have the best record from June 1st on to the end of the year, the best record in Major League Baseball, I believe. And they played really sound fundamental ball, good defense. The pitching was always a problem, and it still is right now going into this season. And I think that's where they need to now. That's where their focus should be, outside of, my opinion, signing Pete. We'll see where that goes. But pitching has always been the name of the game. But as a broadcaster, yes, we've had some bad years here in New York with the Mets, and the teams have been not very good, and much more than when they've been good. And it's always, as a broadcaster, when you got a team out there that plays good baseball and fundamental baseball, not just batting cage major leaguers where they bash you to death. They also play the other side of the field on the defense and running the bases. That's the beauty of the game, and that's what I love, and that's what they did last year, and it was just a treat. I'm looking forward to them doing the same thing and improving on it.
A batting cage major leaguer. I want to explain that because as an insider, there's a batting cage major leaguer. There's a bullpen pitcher, which means when they're warming up in the bullpen, they look nasty. They look so good. Or when they're taking BP, they're hitting moonshots, and then you put them in a game and they're 0 for 4 with 3 Ks. Or as a pitcher, they go under an inning pitched with 4 walks and 3 hits. So that was a funny expression that we use. But as a broadcaster, Keith, you've been through losing seasons, winning seasons, yet you have a very rare thing. You have a partnership with Gary Cohn and Ron Darling that you guys are known as the best booth. Building a booth in Florida, Keith, we always wanted to build your booth. That's what we tried with every hiring we did, was to find that chemistry. What is it? Do you guys hang out after games, or is it like a clubhouse where you go 3 separate cabs? How do you keep it so fresh and good after all these years?
Well, number one, Kurt Gowdy Jr. put the team together. And I was the first hire because I was doing like maybe 30, 40 games for MSG, the Madison Square Garden Network. And they were running in and out different play-by-play guys and different analysts. When the SNY Network started, Fred Wilpon wanted to have a solid team like the original Met team, which was, we just surpassed Lindsey Nelson, Ralph Kiner, and Bob Murphy, who did 18 years. And next year is going to be our 20th year in the booth together. And the fans relate to the broadcast. I'm 20 years that we're together as a team. You've got a whole generation that's grown up watching us, and they identify with us. I grew up in San Francisco, and I had Lon Simmons and Russ Hodges with the Giants. And we didn't have that many games televised, but they were on the radio and they were on the TV. And we identified with them, with the Giants as kids growing up. And nothing's changed than that in today's world with the young fans now. So I think it's a good thing. And Kurt put the whole the thing together. He hired me first, and he hired Gary Cohen, brought him over from radio. Gary was always just a radio guy. Mm-hmm. So Gary's position was to go to TV, which radio, you've got to talk more because you haven't got a visual. In TV, the saying is more is less. So because the fans are seeing, there's a ground ball to shortstop. Well, I'm sitting on I know that's a ground ball to shortstop. So, you don't want to add too much. Ron was the last hire. And I know that Lorraine Hamilton with the Mets saying they were looking for a third guy because I wasn't going to do 160 games. And they had to have someone. I was going to do 110, and they had to have someone else. So Ron was in Washington that year. Never did it before. Was a late hire with the Nationals when Frank Robinson was managing. And I reunited with Ron. I hadn't seen Ron in years. He's living on the West Coast. So I called him in the winter. I said, Ron, do you want to broadcast in Washington, or would you rather be in New York? Because I know Ronnie loved in New York when we played together. And he said, New York, of course. I said, well, you better get on the phone and call Lorraine Hamilton at the Mets and tell them to get an audition. So Kurt hired him, and that was the team. Now, what I think makes our broadcast good is, number one, Gary's the foundation of the broadcast. He grew up a Met fan. He knows Met history. He keeps us sharp. He makes people around him better. We have to be on our toes when we're broadcasting with him.
He's the conductor.
He'll ask poignant questions, and I can't drift. And I can drift in some of the games when they were 3 hours, 3.5 hours. Thank God for the clock. But we decided in spring training when we started, we didn't know what to do. And I said, Ronnie, you're the pitcher. I'm the hitter. I can't talk about pitching, fundamentals of pitching like you can. So you handle the pitching, and I'll handle the offense, the hitting part of the game. And so the fans get a pitcher's point of view and a hitter's point of view, and I think that's critical.
So you were a pitching, just so you know, your specialty is not just hitting, it's also defense. I want to point out that a whole generation of people know you as a broadcaster. However, you won 11 Gold Gloves, 11, 2 Silver Sluggers. You won a batting title. You have 2 World Series rings. You're not a schlepper on the field by any stretch. And so having the transition, it's interesting because there are people you meet now, I assume, who to them, you are the voice and the narrator of a Mets team that's been mostly negative, occasionally positive, and they may have no idea that you actually were you. Do you ever feel the need to say, by the way, I played the game, like with players? I had a bunch of Marlins players, Keith, when we had broadcasters, they didn't even know that they had played because they were young, and so they wouldn't listen to them. People didn't know Jeff Conine played, or Andre Dawson, good example. How are you helpful to players who may not realize what your bona fides are as a player?
Well, believe it or not, it's very interesting in a world we live in today with computers, where you're just get on the whatever search engine you're on, and the information is there for you instantaneously. And if you're of acquisitive nature, and I grew up, my father taught us history, so I knew Ty Cobb and Babe Ruth and Joe DiMaggio, Bob Feller, to name a few, Satchel Paige. It's not what's going on today. I've got a lot of players, to be honest with you, that would come up in the Mets and didn't know who the hell I was. I had one player actually I went up to introduce myself, and he grabbed my credential, look at my credential to see who I was in spring training. So I had to, okay, I can take that. My ego can take that. But I do find it very interesting that they're not steeped in baseball tradition. I was on a bus ride, and I know I'm wandering here. And I always said that Pete Alonso was the next closest thing to Harmon Killebrew. And I mentioned it to Pete on a bus one time on the way to the ballpark on the road, and he had no idea who Harvard Killebrew was. And I said, "You have no idea?"
Wow.
I go, here's give me your phone number. I'll text you. I went on Baseball Reference and I texted him Harmon Killebrew. And he came up to me and he said, "Holy cow, he's pretty good." I go, "Yeah,
You
pretty good
should wish
compliment."
to be Harmon Killebrew, Keith.
He's in the 500 home run club. I mean,
Right.
come on.
Pete Alonso is not Harmon Killebrew. He may be one day, but I don't think he can ever reach those levels. I don't know how to deal with that. I tried for 18 years, Keith, to try to understand how to communicate with players. And as I was getting older and they were staying the same age, it became even harder. And you've been doing this 20 years. You played for so many years. You're getting older. All of the players you're talking about are staying the same age. The game is changing so tremendously. We have the pitch clock, which you just mentioned, which as an executive and broadcaster, it's manna from heaven because 4-hour games at home, it's a nightmare come true. And I know that you had an opinion about that. You must be thrilled. Where were you on the Golden at bat that just was rumored recently? And I know that you know about it. What was your opinion of that?
Well, number one, I think it was just a publicity stunt, to be honest with you. And anybody in their right mind, how can you even think about doing that? So you're telling me you wait to the eighth inning or ninth inning, and Soto's made the last out, or Ohtani, and then you can have them come up if there's a rally and just insert him anywhere. I mean, that's just absolutely absurd, and I don't really take it very seriously. I don't think it'll fly.
So, Keith, I came up with that in a meeting, in a competition committee meeting 15 years ago, and here was my thought. So I just want to present the argument, and then I want you to tell me that you hate it.
Okay.
I want to create as many memories for people as possible and as many reasons for them to engage in our game. And I want to have young people because our demographic was getting older in baseball, and they were all going to die. So I had to reverse that trend. So I thought, what's the way to create viral moments the best? And the answer was, you can manufacture them the way other sports just have them happen. Michael Jordan has the ball at the end of every game. And I thought of it, Keith, when the Marlins won the World Series in 2003, and Derek Jeter was watching the ninth inning the same way I was as president of the Marlins. Jeter was in the dugout watching, and I was thinking, oh, I can't believe he doesn't get to hit. We don't have to get him out. And I remember thinking that in 2003, and then years later, I thought, why not make it so the person at the end who you want to hit can hit? That was the genesis of the idea.
It's always the luck of the draw. I remember Tom Seaver telling me, David, that he would look 2 innings ahead, 3 innings ahead. Okay, he said we're playing the Giants, and it was Mays McCovey back to back, and then Jim Ray Hart. Jim Ray Hart, no one will probably remember Jim Ray Hart, but Jim Ray Hart was a very dangerous third baseman and hitter, hit behind McCovey. Seaver had told me that he would look ahead, and how critical it was for him in the 7th inning. He would go down, okay, Mays in the 9th inning. I'm pitching a 1-run game. I don't want Mays up. So I got to get hitter 1 through 6 out. Mm-hmm. So Mays doesn't hit. So, and that which I never even thought of, which goes to show you the intelligence of Tom and the great pitcher that he was. You're never going to convince me for that. I think the pitch clock shortening the game it's been critical. I don't like the pitcher reliever who's got to come in and face 3 batters. I'll meet that halfway. 1st through 6th inning, you can have that rule. But let the manager manage from the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning. When the game, it's a 1-run game, and you've got a split lineup, the manager should be able to bring in a left-hander to get a lefty out, and then a right-hander if he wants to bring a right-hander in to get a right-hander out. From the 7th inning on, I think that would be fine. I don't like the 3 pitches over for a runner stealing base. I think that is too unfair an advantage to the pitchers, to the defense. I think that's a bad rule that needs to be changed. The pitcher should be able to throw over as many times as he wants. And I know that stolen base. Look, I love the hit and run, and that's a thing in the past. And there was a lot of people that I love to hit.
Analytics say that you don't want to run into an out when you could have an opportunity to have a runner on for a home run.
But you can set up a first and third situation.
I agree with you.
And you notice the defenses last year now, you notice how, because they can't, I didn't like the shift. I'm glad the shift is gone. I thought it really, I would have had to make an adjustment as a left-hand hitter. It had more effect on a left-hand hitter than it did on a right-hand hitter when you put, like softball, a guy out in the outfield. It took away that first and third hole, first and second base hole for the left hitter. And also situation hitting. When you get up late and it's a one-run ball game, you're down a run, you're up a run, it's a tie ball game, you're down two, you're up two. The guy gets a leadoff single. You get that base hit into right field, and that sets up first and third. That sets up a whole big inning right there and critical runs out there. So I'm glad that was gone. But what has happened now is they have brought the opposite fielder. So it's a right-hand hitter. They bring the second baseman over as far as he can up the middle. And, I'll give you an example. Starlin Marte. Marte goes the other way naturally. And the runners, he's a good hitter. He's a very good hitter. And he knows how to handle the bat. And I see, and I'm going, okay, where's the analytics on this where you're putting the second baseman just up the middle as far as he can with his right foot right next to the line of, from home plate to center field.
Right to the edge of what's allowed.
And you're opening up the whole right side of the infield. And it's set, you can drive a friggin' division of tanks through there. And it sets up a first and third. I just don't understand that. And it's also with a left-hander. They do the same thing, reversed. I used to always like, when I played for the Mets, I was in control of who covered on the hit and run. Because hit and run was prevalent back then. And I always like to have, usually the opposite field guy covers the bag, right? And I used to like to switch it and have the pull side cover. Well, I did that once at Dodger Stadium. It was the right-hand hitter up. And I don't matter who, and it was a tight game, and it was the middle of the game, the sixth, seventh inning, and I had the second baseman come in, the shortstop. It was a left-hand hitter. I had the shortstop second baseman cover. Excuse me.
Right.
Well, he hits a ground ball right where the second baseman should have been in his first and third, and I came in after the inning, and Davey came down the bench and chewed me out. And said, don't you ever do that again. I don't ever want to see the right side of the infield exposed like that in a close game where it sets up a first and third. And I just said, okay, I'll never do it again. And I never did. And
you're talking about Davey Johnson?
Yes.
Who was then the manager. And I would only say that you're so connected to the game still. How do you not get as frustrated as I do where situational hitting it doesn't happen anymore? People don't change. There's no two-strike approach. There's no, and I don't want to sound old and grumpy, but when you're in the ninth inning and you're down a run, or a pitcher has no command, take a strike, for crying out loud. It's just not taught anymore. 3-0, you need a base runner. You're swinging? What? And as a broadcaster and as obviously who you were as a player, how do you not lose your mind? Other than the way you do as a broadcaster, but for real.
Well, you have to bite your tongue. You can't.
Terrible at that.
The game has changed. Analytics has taken over a lot in the game, and there's a lot of good things about analytics, and I'm sure you're aware of that. But I think it's a little bit of overkill. A lot of stuff is overkill. There's some things I don't understand that they do, and so I'll mention it. You just don't want to beat a dead horse, and that's all there is to it. And and another point too, though, Dave. You talked about taking a pitch. Not if it's right down the pipe and it's a pitch to hit. Okay, it's a selective hitting. Okay, yes, okay, you're down a couple runs, but you're in the hunt. Now, obviously, you take a strike if you're down 5 runs, 4 runs in the late. You're down 2 runs, 1 run, 3 runs, and men are on base. I was always a first ball fastball hitter, and if that guy threw me a bad breaking ball, I'd be all over it too.
Wait,
But
you
I
wouldn't get the
don't.
green light. Hold on, Keith. You're saying that down 2 runs, no one on, you would get the green light at 3-0?
Oh no, no, no. We never had our day. 3-0 was an automatic take.
Automatic.
In my 17 years of playing, I maybe had less than two handfuls of 3-0 hit signs from the manager. It was an automatic take.
And
I wish I could have had today would have let me swing 3-0. I wish.
so let me ask about the different managers you played for.
When you're down, you can't do it. When you're down and you need base runners, you can't do it.
Were you scared of any of your managers, of upsetting any of your managers when you were a player?
Well, when I was young, Red was my first manager, Red Shandies, and I was just a young kid. I was 20 years old when I got called up to the big leagues in late August. Joe Torre sprained his thumb, and the Mets were in a pennant chase with the Pirates. We wound up losing the division the last 2 days of the season, and I had to go in and play. And I was just, I was just a young kid, and I struggled my first 3 years, and I didn't want to piss Red off, that's for sure. I remember one time he pinched hit for me in Busch Stadium, and George Kissel was the bench coach, and I was in the on deck circle, and I was 21 years old, and he pinched hit for me, which was the right thing to do. I was struggling, and I threw my helmet on the bat rack.
Uh-oh.
And it ricocheted and hit Red in the head. Oh boy, I wanted to go hide somewhere. There wasn't a hole I could dig deep enough to get. I got as far away from him as possible, and Red never reacted, which was just amazing.
So you never went. You never went with the "I'm sorry." You went right to the other side of the bench.
When it happened, I said, "Red, I'm sorry," and I just went and hid.
And when you talk about a manager that's your type of manager, there's people who have the expression a player's manager. And I had so many managers in my career, we just kept firing them because when we had a player's manager, then we wanted a disciplinarian. When we had a disciplinarian, then we wanted a player's manager. We would keep going back and forth. What type of manager was your favorite to play for? What traits did they have?
Well, Red never really communicated with the players, and I was 20 years old, and that was a veteran team. It had Rick Wise, Bob Gibson, Joe Torre, Ted Sizemore, Lou Brock. It was a veteran team, and Red really never communicated. You never knew the lineup. And today, I remember getting on the bus, and today they tell the guy you got the day off, or you're in there tomorrow, and I'd have to come to the park on the bus and look, and I'd go right to the lineup on the chalkboard to see if I was in there or not. But today they let you know, and I think that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. What do I look for from a manager? Player managers were Davey Johnson and Lou Brock. I mean, not Lou Brock, Ken Boyer, who I played for. Ken and I played for in AAA. They were player managers. Boyer did not have a lot of. He let the players go. Davey let us just come to the park. He just said, "Don't embarrass us. Don't embarrass the organization. Just come here ready to play. If you're in the lineup, I expect you to play. If you're out all night and you can't play because you're out all night, then that's not going to make me very happy." Whitey was a little bit of both. Whitey Herzog. He was a terrific field manager, absolutely terrific. He communicated with the players. I mean, Whitey was kind of a character right out of a William Faulkner novel. He could toss the ball around, and he did with the players. But he was the white rat. It was a nickname he had, and there's a reason.
Yeah, well, also he had the hair.
Yes, and you fell out of favor with Whitey, he'd let you know. And but I enjoy. It's a different today. I always felt that we were the platoon, we were the privates. Okay, the manager was the platoon leader, and the general manager was the general. And we never saw the general managers back then. I had Bing Devine. Never saw Bing in the clubhouse, hardly at all, unless he had a meeting that we were playing so terrible, which was very rare. We had some bad years. Frank Cashin would come in only every Sunday in the day games And he would march through the clubhouse into Davy's office because they'd have their annual meeting before BP every Sunday on a home game. We never saw the general managers. Today, the general managers are out there. They're friendly with the players. There's no separation. There's more of they're trying to accommodate the players. Where in our day, you know, we didn't communicate with the general manager.
You know, you're talking about, Keith, player empowerment a little bit, and you're talking about the fact that it's really a money issue. If you'll permit me to draw an inference, when there are players, it used to be that executives were making more money than players, and it wasn't too long ago. Then it switched, but managers were certainly making more money than their players. Now there is not a manager, who makes more money than the players. The minimum maybe, but the big-time players, and so it's a different world in all the sports. And I was thinking about how players react, because you mentioned the war analogy and generals and captains and platoon leaders. It's hard to be a manager today, and the Mets have a manager who seems to have figured it out in a way that very few managers are able to, and it's made Carlos Mendoza a very popular figure. Is that true, that he's that way with the players and the front office, where he can manage up to Steve Cohen and David Stearns and also manage down into the clubhouse? Because that's the number one skill. Is that what he's good at?
Well, I don't get involved, like I said earlier, with the front office and their inner workings, but it does seem like David Stearns and Carlos have a good working relationship. Now, I've heard that managers don't make the lineups out anymore. The analytics department does. Well, that's got to be at the behest and the full agreement of the general manager. Does a manager bite his tongue? Player X, I want him in the fifth hole when maybe he wants player X in the two hole,
Mm-hmm.
and they run out all these numbers at him. Okay, fine. I just think that Carlos is of the personality where he's very gregarious. He's every day. He's got a smile on his face.
Even keeled.
He never changes. That club had that 9 and 21 May last year. That was his first year managing. And that club was playing like going in the tank for a whole month in May, second month of managing in the big leagues. He never changed his personality, his demeanor. He was always smiling, always pleasant. So that showed me a lot. Now, as far as his managing on the field and in working with the players, the clubhouses today are like embassies. Okay, they're so huge. When I played, we had one clubhouse. We had a little tiny eats room in the back where the press couldn't go, or the trainer's room. But basically, we had no. They got second rooms, the clubhouses now, where the press can't go, that are just as big as the clubhouse where they have to dress, where they're exposed to the press. So you go into the clubhouse, a lot of the players, hardly all the players, they're in the back. They got the weight rooms back there. They got a pool table. They got a kitchen.
A quiet room.
And you can't get at them. And another thing, too, I don't like is they've sequestered the manager. The managers are cordoned off where you can't get at them. Mm-hmm. And the coaches used to dress with us in the clubhouse. The coaches are sequestered. And we don't have that access to the coaching staff and the manager. Now, we do with the manager. We meet with Carlos on every first game of a series. He allows the TV talent and the radio talent that we have a 20-minute, 15-minute rap session with him, which is terrific. Mm-hmm. But if the coaches, they're not accessible. You want to talk to the hitting coach. You want to maybe talk to the pitching coach. That's a part of the game I don't like. That has changed the things that I don't like. It makes it more difficult. And for certain times with the Mets, the media, I never minded the media during BP hanging around the cage. It never bothered me. It never got in the way of me staying focused on my BP and my preparation and my batting practice, which was very disciplined. And I would chatter around when I wasn't hitting. I never minded the press around. And the press is not allowed around the batting cage during BP now. And I think that's a negative too.
I want to return to this year's Mets. And one thing about last season that you mentioned, the bad May, and how the Mets really turned it around and then ended up in the league championship series. And Lindor, I want to talk about Francisco Lindor for a minute because Soto comes in and people may think this is Soto's team. I would argue that for the Mets to win a World Series and to be successful, it's got to keep being Lindor's team, and that he is truly the cog that everybody looks to, and sort of the glue of the team, his relationship with the managers, relationship with his teammates. Is there a thought in your mind as you look at this coming season that Lindor may say, "Oi, I've got a guy here making $51 million, getting $765. Do I give him a little power?" I wonder whether or not that's an issue that could hurt the Mets.
Well, you can draw a comparison in 1985 when the Mets acquired Gary Carter. And that was the missing cog that we needed to make that team what it was in the 80s and eventually get a world championship. And all the press made a big deal of, is Carter and Hernandez going to get along? I was ecstatic that we got Carter. Carter was the kind of player that when you played against him, you didn't like. And, he was, how brilliant he was. And he was the big favored one in Montreal. When we got him, all the press would ask the same question: well, are we going to get along, the two of us, two superstars with egos, or are they going to clash? I made it a point that was never going to happen, and it didn't. And we're here for one reason. What's the one reason?
Win.
Well, every team, when they start day one in spring training, is to get to the World Series and be a world champion. And that's the overriding factor. This Met team is very close. Lindor, it is his team. There's no question. Soto's going to be just another guy, the veteran they're going to look up to, and they can share. And I think it's going to be a seamless adjustment, and I think it's going to be absolutely just fine.
A veteran at 26. I'm not sure that happens all that often.
Oh shoot! Let me see. I won my MVP when I was 25.
It is you were extraordinary, Keith. Obviously, I want to talk about though when you're putting together a team and you're looking at bringing in Soto. On the other hand, you're looking at what other teams are doing. So you saw the Yankees reacted after Soto signed. They immediately signed Max Fried. Then you saw immediately, if you remember, when the Red Sox acquired Crochet, the pitcher for the White Sox, who was traded to the Red Sox. The Dodgers signed Blake Snell. There's seemingly, obviously, every team making moves. And when you're running a team, you're trying to close gaps. That's what you're doing. You're trying to add victories and close gaps to the teams you're chasing. Do you feel as though that gap right now, short of re-signing Alonso, so I'm assuming Alonso's back, so just adding Soto and Holmes, is that a gap that the Mets have closed as you look at other teams like the Dodgers, like the Yankees?
Well, I look at Phillies, the two teams that they're going to be battling. It's Atlanta and the Phillies. The Phillies, I think, were exposed at the back end of their lineup was not so hot. And the Braves suffered a lot of injuries last year. They really had a remarkable season, I felt, with all the injuries they had, but they lost Fried. So that's a step back for me, as far as I'm concerned. The Mets have taken a step forward. Now, does it, and to a degree, yes, it closes the gap, no question. But to me, pitching is the name of the game, and that's where their focus has to be. The Mets they had an incredible, they went to the championship series and lost to the team that won the World Series. And I think the pitching finally caught up with them. I remember Red Shandy saying to me when we got into the 82 World Series against the Brewers, and Red turned to me and said, well, there's a reason why these teams are here. You're playing the best team in the other league. They're the very best, and you're the very best of your league. So it's not going to be easy. It's going to be very competitive. They're not here for no reason. They're here for a reason. They've earned it. They are the best team. That's why they got here. And more so today with the different tiers of the playoffs. Now, we only had the division playoffs, 5-game series, and that was it. then you went up to the World Series. Now you got you got the wild
Wild
card,
card round.
you got 3 tiers to get
Yep.
there.
Division series, league championship series. Then you got to get to the World Series. You have to win 11 games plus the wild card round, 13 games in order to win a World Series.
And those teams that got there are division winners, and sometimes they're good wild card teams, and you can get bumped off. It's very easy to get bumped off.
It happened to the Dodgers. They got swept by the Diamondbacks 2 seasons ago, and the Diamondbacks ended up going to the World Series, and the Diamondbacks didn't have Ohtani, and they had 2 disappointing playoff appearances in a row, and then this past year they win the World Series. People, you did it twice for 2 different teams totally in terms of the makeup of those teams. If people want to go back and talk about the 82 Darryl Porter MVP Cardinals and the 86 Mets, it would be a fun thing to Google, the 86 Mets. Keith, when you look at the Mets team, I'm thinking, are they a championship team? And the answer is championships aren't made in the offseason. And you can sign Soto. You can do whatever you want in the offseason. My view is winning the offseason doesn't win you a ring. So I think that I don't know if as a player you would look at the trade deadline and you would look at how the season unfolds. I think that's where more help is needed and more front office involvement to help your team is needed. Did you find that?
Well, when I played, it was June 15th. Now it's the end of July. And I'd like to ask you a question. What's your feeling? Do you like it better at the end of July having the trade deadline, or the old way when it was June 15th? You think that was too early?
I liked the August 30th one. I liked the waiver deadline of August 30th that's now gone because it gave our team an extra month to see whether or not. I always had the dream that we're 1 game away from a hot streak. We are 1-7-3, 10-game stretch to be in the race, and I wanted to wait as long as possible before trading players. Then when it was moved to only July 31st, my worry was I got to hang on for 2 months now, one way or the other. So there's a big discussion to be had here, Keith, and we'll do it on a different show. I think there's an argument to have 2 deadlines during the season again. One in June, and then one again at the end of August. I want teams to have 2 opportunities where you can be a buyer and a seller, or a seller twice or a buyer twice, and I've never been able to secure the votes for that, but I think it could rear its head again.
Okay. In regard to teams, I think, you're only as good as your last at bat. You're only as good as your last season. You had a great year last year, but you got to do it again. That was always my motivation. That I looked to Steve Garvey, and Steve Garvey year in, year out. I can't say he's a very underrated player. I don't know why he doesn't get more attention for Hall of Fame recognition. He was the toughest clutch hitter. If you look at his body of work, was consistent over an X period of time. So as an example, Vientos had a terrific year last year. And I mean, he's got some tremendous power to center field, opposite field. He's had one good year.
He's back at 0, Keith.
Do it again. There's no guarantee. And in today's game, how many times do you see a player have a good year and the next year stink? I mean, particularly in the bullpens. I mean, to me, the bullpens are just a crapshoot.
That's why, for me, I don't build a bullpen during the offseason ever. I want to build the bullpen during the season. 2 deadlines would be great because I want to acquire the hot arm, and I want to bring him to my team to really help the team because it's hard to be a good bullpen arm multiple years in a row. And bullpens, as you know, as a hitter and fielder, devastating. To me, if you had to ask me what's the one thing that crushes a team, it's a blown save. It is way more crushing than an error, way more. Blown saves are just brutal, and that's something that it's something you try to legislate against. I want to end because we only have a minute and a half left, which is unbelievable. I'm sorry. A season's like pushing a boulder up a mountain. You're pushing the boulder up. You're pushing it up. You're trying to get to the top, which is the World Series. 29 teams have the boulder crash down upon them at the end of the year, whenever that comes, and then all 30 start again to push the boulder up. As you look back on your career, I want to hear the moment that was the most deflating, just as we end. I want to hear what was the most deflating and the biggest moment, the worst moment and the biggest. Keith, tell me, because you won a World Series, MVP, all these things you've done. You've been on Seinfeld, for Christ's sake. What's your greatest moment and your worst moment?
Worst moment was when I was ready to be sent down. I was 20 years old. I was struggling, and Red took me out of the lineup. And I went up against Don Gullett, if you remember him with the Reds, before he hurt his arm. And he was like that country hard tosser in The Natural, the movie that came in that Robert Redford hit the home run off of, that broke the lights. The big over-the-top fastball, he threw bullets, and he struck me out on 3 pitches up above my nose, eye level. I was totally overmatched, and I was never that was the nadir of my career. And then within 4 days, I was sent down, thank God. And I was able to go down to AAA and get my act back together under the tutelage of Ken Boyer, who was the AAA manager. The height of my career was that, and you'll be surprised, is that if you look at my career, I struggled. I never had a good April the first 3 years of my career. 77 was a breakout year for me, where I would burn rap, where I hit 15 home runs, drove in 91 runs. Came back in 78. I hit 300 the first half of the season. And then the second half of the season, I hit 215. I drove in 20 runs. I wound up hitting 255. I can't explain it to this day. Mm-hmm. I go into 79. I get off to a terrible April, 230, and then I win the batting title and the MVP. And then I go to spring training in 80. You would think that would be it. I go to spring training, and the papers are saying, will the real Keith Hernandez stand up, like the game show?
The game show to tell the truth.
Yes, and I went into that opening day nervous. And I remember Dick Ruthen was pitching for the Phillies, and I was nervous because I got my April again is in the back of my head, my bad Aprils. And I hit a double down the right field line, one hop, bullet in Busch Stadium, opening day, first at bat. And I got a stand-up double. And when I got to second base, I said, I'm here. I've arrived.
I can't believe it. I'm going to end on that note because you're a World Series champion, one of the greatest broadcasters in the history of baseball, MVP, everything, and your moment is getting a stand-up double on opening day. That is unexpected and wonderful. Keith Hernandez, please pay attention to him. Watch Mets broadcast. They're a team to watch this year. Keith, I really do appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us.